Jerry asked one question, just one question, and the woman standing center stage collapsed, fell to her knees, hands covering her face, and 300 people held their breath. The studio had been chaos 30 seconds earlier. Screaming. Accusations flying. Security guards positioned between two women who looked ready to tear each other apart. The audience on their feet chanting, "Jerry! Jerry! Jerry!" in that familiar rhythmic roar that defined the show. Classic Jerry Springer. Pure tabloid television. Exactly what America tuned in for at 3 p.m. on weekday afternoons. But now, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The woman on her knees was sobbing so hard her entire body shook. Her hands pressed against her face, tears streaming through her fingers, her shoulders heaving with each breath. She'd been standing strong just moments ago, angry, defiant, ready to fight. Now she looked like she'd been shot. Jerry Springer stood 6 feet away, microphone still raised from asking the question, his face frozen in an expression the production crew had rarely seen in 27 years of the show, genuine shock. The security guards, massive men in black t-shirts who'd broken up thousands of fights, didn't move. They didn't know what to do. This wasn't a physical altercation. This was something else entirely. The other woman on stage, the one who'd been screaming accusations just moments before, had gone completely still. Her mouth hung open. Her finger, which had been pointing accusingly, slowly lowered. In the control room, director Brian Tillman's hand hovered over the commercial break button. But he didn't press it. Something told him to keep rolling. Jerry raised his hand. The chanting stopped. The entire studio went silent. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 15 minutes earlier. The episode had been promoted as typical Springer fare. "My sister stole my man." The kind of title that promised exactly the chaos the show was known for. Two sisters confronting each other over a boyfriend. Guaranteed screaming match. Guaranteed attempt at physical violence. Guaranteed ratings. Tanya Morrison had been the first guest brought out. 34 years old, blonde, angry. She'd stormed onto the stage to audience applause, sat in the guest chair with her arms crossed, and immediately launched into her story. "My sister is a backstabbing snake," Tanya had said, voice dripping with venom. "I've been with Marcus for 3 years. 3 years. We have a life together. We have plans. And she..." Tanya's voice broke slightly, though whether from genuine emotion or performance was unclear. "She's been sleeping with him behind my back for 6 months." The audience had booed on cue. Jerry had nodded with his trademark calm skepticism, letting her continue. "She comes to my house for family dinners. She looks me in the eye and lies. She texts him when I'm in the bathroom. She's been playing me this whole time." "And you found out how?" Jerry had asked, his tone neutral, guiding the narrative forward as he'd done 10,000 times before. "I saw the messages on his phone. Pictures. Plans to meet up. Everything. And when I confronted Marcus, you know what he said?" Tanya had leaned forward, playing to the audience. "He said it wasn't his fault. He said she came onto him. That she was obsessed. That she wouldn't leave him alone." The audience had erupted. Boos. Shouts. Someone yelled, "Bring her out." Jerry had smiled slightly, that knowing smile that said he'd seen this story 100 times. "Well, your sister is here. And she says you've got the whole thing wrong. Let's bring her out." The music had kicked in. The audience had stood, screaming. And Rachel Morrison had walked onto the stage. Younger than Tanya by 3 years. Darker hair. Similar features but softer somehow. She'd walked out wearing jeans and a simple blouse, and something about her body language was wrong for a Jerry Springer guest. She wasn't strutting, wasn't playing to the crowd. She looked terrified. She'd sat in the chair across from Tanya and immediately said, "I'm so sorry." That had thrown everyone off. Guests didn't apologize right away. They came out defensive, combative, ready to justify themselves. But Rachel had led with an apology, her voice small, and Tanya had seized on it like a weapon. Sorry? Tanya had exploded out of her chair. You're sorry? You slept with my boyfriend for 6 months and you're sorry? Security had immediately moved in, hands up, ready to separate them. The audience had roared approval. This was what they came for. But Rachel hadn't stood up. She'd stayed in her chair, hands folded in her lap, and said quietly, You're right. I did. And I'm sorry. What Jerry didn't know was that Rachel had been sitting in the green room since 6 a.m. that morning, writing and rewriting the same letter over and over. The show started filming at 10 a.m. Rachel had arrived 4 hours early, asked the production assistant if she could have paper and a pen, and had sat in the corner writing while other guests socialized and psyched themselves up for their onstage confrontations. The PA had noticed because it was unusual. Most guests were nervous, excited, or angry, pacing, practicing their lines, checking their makeup. But Rachel had just written pages and pages in small, neat handwriting. Then she'd crumple each page and start over. By the time they'd called her to the stage, there'd been 27 crumpled letters in the trash can. On stage, Tanya was screaming, You don't get to sit there looking pathetic. You don't get to play victim. You knew what you were doing. Rachel had looked up at her sister, and for the first time, her voice had some strength. You're right. I knew exactly what I was doing. The audience had reacted, ooze of recognition, sensing the conflict escalating. Jerry had leaned back in his classic pose, letting it play out, knowing exactly where this was headed. I knew Marcus had a girlfriend. Rachel had continued. I knew it was you. I knew it was wrong. She'd paused, and something shifted in her expression. But Tanya, you need to know why. I don't care why. Tanya had lunged forward. Security had grabbed her immediately, 2 large men holding her back while she struggled. There is no why that makes this okay. 3 years ago, Rachel had said, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected clarity. You came to me and asked me for help. Tanya had stopped struggling. Just for a second. Something flickered across her face. You asked me if I would watch your apartment while you were at work. Rachel had continued. You said Marcus had been acting weird. You wanted me to see if anyone came by. The studio had started to quiet slightly. This wasn't the usual script. And I did, Rachel had said. I sat in your apartment for 6 hours. And Marcus showed up at 2 p.m. with another woman. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The audience had gone completely silent. This was no longer the story they'd been sold. Her name was Jennifer, Rachel had said, her voice steady now despite the tears on her cheeks. She was your coworker. And I watched them walk into your bedroom. I heard them through the walls. I sat in your living room for 2 hours while your boyfriend cheated on you 10 feet away from me. Tanya's face had drained of color. The security guards had loosened their grips slightly, confused. I called you. Rachel had continued. Do you remember? I called you at work and told you that you needed to come home. That it was an emergency. And you said you couldn't leave because you had a meeting. You told me to handle whatever it was. Jerry Springer had straightened in his chair. His producer's voice had crackled in his earpiece. We don't have this in the pre-interview notes. Rachel had reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. I took this picture that day. Of them leaving together. I've carried it for 3 years because I didn't know what to do with it. She'd held it up. The camera had zoomed in. A blurry but clear image of a man and woman walking out of an apartment door together, his hand on her back. Why didn't you tell me? Tanya's voice had cracked, her anger collapsing into something rawer. Because by the time you got home, they were gone. And when you walked in, you were so happy. You said Marcus had just texted you saying he loved you. You showed me the message. You were smiling. You said you'd been paranoid for nothing. Rachel's hands had been shaking as she held the photograph. I spent that whole night trying to decide whether to show you this. Whether to tell you what I saw. and I decided I couldn't. Because you were happy. And you'd been so sad for so long after Dad died. I couldn't take that happiness away from you. Behind the scenes, Jerry made a decision that no producer had ever seen him make before. Jerry had stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during confrontations unless he was breaking up a fight. But he hadn't moved toward the women. He'd walked to the center of the stage, between them, and raised his hand toward the audience. "Hold on," he'd said quietly. "Everyone just hold on." The audience had been so conditioned to chaos that the calm command had shocked them into silence. The chanting had stopped mid-syllable. Jerry had looked at Rachel. "You've been carrying this picture for 3 years." "Yes." "And you never showed her." "No." "So why?" Jerry had paused, and his voice had carried genuine curiosity instead of his usual neutral prodding. "Why did you sleep with Marcus?" Rachel had looked down at the photograph in her hands. "Because 6 months ago, I ran into Jennifer. Marcus's other girlfriend from 3 years ago. At a coffee shop. The reveal was coming. Everyone in the studio could feel it. And she told me something." Rachel had continued. "She told me that Marcus had called her 2 months after they broke up. He wanted to get back together. And she'd said no because she'd found out he was still with Tanya. She'd found out he'd been cheating on both of them." Rachel had looked up at her sister. "Jennifer told me that Marcus does this. He has for years. He has a primary girlfriend, you, and then he has others on the side. Multiple others. She said I should warn you because she wished someone had warned her." Tanya had gone very still. "So I did something stupid," Rachel had said. "I thought if I could prove to you that Marcus was cheating, if I could make him cheat with me, then you'd finally leave him. If it was your own sister, you couldn't ignore it. You couldn't make excuses." The audience had gasped. Security had exchanged glances. This wasn't Jerry Springer chaos anymore. This was something else. "I texted him," Rachel had continued. "I flirted. I made it easy for him. And it took exactly 3 days before he asked to meet up. 3 days. I have the messages. I have everything. And I let it happen because I thought." She'd broken down slightly. "I thought if it was me, you'd finally see him for what he is. You'd finally leave." But this was the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jerry Springer had done something he almost never did in 27 years of hosting the show. He turned to the audience and said, "I need everyone to shut up for the next 60 seconds. No chanting. No yelling. Just listen." The studio had gone dead silent. Then Jerry had turned to Rachel. And he'd asked the question that had made her fall to her knees. "Rachel," he'd said quietly, "if Marcus walked out on this stage right now and chose Tanya, if he said he loved her and wanted to make it work with her, would you be relieved?" Rachel's face had crumpled. The photograph had slipped from her fingers and fallen to the stage floor. And she'd collapsed, just dropped to her knees right there in the center of the stage, hands covering her face, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Because the answer was yes. And everyone in the studio suddenly understood what this really was. Jerry had knelt down beside her. Not for the cameras. Not for the show. Just down on the stage floor next to a woman who'd carried 3 years of guilt because she tried to save her sister the only way she knew how. "You didn't want him," Jerry said quietly. "You never did." Rachel shook her head, unable to speak. Jerry looked at Tanya, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her own face. "Your sister just confessed to sleeping with your boyfriend. On national television. Because she loves you more than she loves herself." Tanya walked across the stage. Security tensed, but Jerry waved them off. Tanya knelt down beside her sister and pulled her into an embrace. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't chant. Some cried. Most just watched in stunned silence as two sisters held each other in the wreckage of a truth that hurt but needed to be told. Jerry stood up slowly, picked up the photograph from where it had fallen, and held it up to the camera. Sometimes the person we're angriest at is the person trying hardest to save us. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. After the show, Rachel gave Jerry the 27 crumpled letters from the green room trash. They all said the same thing. "I'm sorry I hurt you to help you." Jerry kept one. In his final episode years later, during his final thought, he mentioned a sister who'd sacrificed everything, including her relationship with her family, to expose a truth no one wanted to hear. "Take care of yourselves," Jerry said that night, "and each other."